Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Oncimmune Holdings half-year results investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just type in your question and then press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet company dashboard. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we would like to submit the following poll, and if you could give that some attention, we'd be very grateful. And I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Adam Hill, CEO, and Matthew Hall, CFO of Oncimmune Holdings PLC. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Adam Hill. I'm the Chief Executive of Oncimmune. And with me is Matthew Hall, the Chief Finance Officer also of Oncimmune. So Oncimmune is a specialist immunology company that has led the way of the field of immunodiagnostics for the last 20 years. Underpinning Oncimmune's success is the proprietary immunogenic protein library that has over 8,800 proteins built up over the 20 years of Oncimmune, and equally the 20 years of Proteogen Diagnostics, a company we acquired in March 2019. Protecting our ability to commercialize that immunogenic protein library are approximately 230 patents granted and pending in 50 territories. And of course, as a research active organization, we publish in peer-reviewed journals in the medical literature. And we have published about 160 peer-reviewed publications and presentations throughout our history. Oncimmune employs 49 team members in Nottingham, UK, Germany, and in London. We have also a very strong relationship with a partner in Shanghai, China. The company monetizes that platform technology and its immunogenic protein library through the development of product and development of services, which we can talk about in a bit more detail. Early CDT, our product portfolio, is focused on the development of autoantibody panels to detect disease early and develop interception panels so that treatment can be started at the most early stage. We monetize our products through licensing on an exclusive and a non-exclusive basis, the ability to market and distribute products in different geographical regions in return for upfront payments, royalties, and volume minima. Our service business, our ImmunoInsights business, is a fee-for-service R&D business. We receive samples, we run those samples over our panels, we produce heat maps from those panels, and we interpret those heat maps, providing a report back to our customers. Our ImmunoInsights business has the potential to develop IP hand in hand with our customers, which we then look to monetize through downstream royalties. The value creation engine is in front of you on this slide. From our immunogenic protein library of over 8,000 antigens, we down select against a question asked of us by our customer, our pharma customers or diagnostic customers, using a proprietary tool, a long listing tool, if you like, our Serotag discovery engine, that maybe reduces the 8,000 potential answers to the question to 1,500 to 2,000 antigens that might bind to the antibodies of relevance in a blood sample. We then use a second layer of proprietary tools called our Navigate panels. And these panels, ranging from 90 to 800 immunogenic proteins, help to shortlist those potential candidates and ultimately produce a heat map, which our response models, again, a proprietary set of bioinformatics or data science models, are able to analyze and identify insight that we believe can be productized to develop value for which we will receive a royalty in the future. So what makes Oncimmune different? Why are we so special when compared to other immunodiagnostic companies? Well, we are absolutely the leaders in our particular biomarker class, the autoantibody. We've proven the utility of that platform technology, which is very well protected by papers, patents, and know-how in the detection of cancer early, but also the stratification of patients for immune modulating therapy in cancer, autoimmune disease, and infectious diseases. We have gone from blank sheet of paper to the largest randomized study of a blood biomarker for cancer detection in the world, the ECLS study, published in this reporting period in the European Respiratory Journal, demonstrating a 36% reduction in late-stage diagnoses of cancer, a tremendous result for a small company such as ours. The proprietary technology is utilized by an expert team, many of whom have only worked in autoantibodies, and the majority of our senior scientific team have been with the company for in excess of a decade. Underpinning this technology and our team is a data set and a bioresource, which we have hitherto mined to develop our own tools, competence, and knowledge. But moving forward, as we have discussed when we last met you, there is interest from our pharmaceutical customers to gain access to that bioresource on a commercial basis. So on to the half-year results. The commercial highlights in the half include having signed 7 contracts with big pharma and biotechs, including Roche Pharmaceuticals and Genentech, amongst others. And those contracts have led to work that is either in flight or completing at this point in time. And we are in discussions over all of those engagements to re-up, extend, broaden, or deepen those relationships. This has led to the cornerstone of what is now a commercial pipeline of over 100 opportunities, up at least, if not more than 50% since we last spoke at the end of October 2020. Currently, 19 of those contracts we have proposals out on that have been accepted, and we are now finessing the commercial engagement before moving into legal contracting, and that generates a value of about £11 million. We have made significant investment into the catalyst for much of this growth, the ImmunoInsights part of our business, through a cost rationalization exercise over the last 12 months, which has allowed us to focus investment on building out our capability in Dortmund, Germany. In this period, we have also been successfully awarded a grant by the UK government. Following 6 months of intensive conversation with the UK government upon their request to identify how Oncimmune can support their response to COVID-19, we have now partnered with the Medicines Discovery Catapult to develop a panel, an infectious disease panel with a focus on COVID-19 that can be used by our commercial partners to better understand how patients are responding to their immune modulating drugs when they have this disease. We have already signed a contract with Cedars-Sinai, a platinum-plated US-based healthcare system on the West Coast. They have not only contributed to the development of this panel, but also have sent us samples for analysis from their staff members who have unfortunately contracted the disease. Equally, we are in final stage negotiations with some big pharmaceutical companies for them to start to use our panel also. In the period, we were able to sign some of our first contracts with the NHS. We will be supporting, as many of you know, the lung health check program in Southampton and in Leeds as it rolls out over the next 3 years, and our test will be used in excess of 30,000 patients as a result of that contract. Equally, we have been contracted to provide the same test, early CDT lung, into Norfolk and Waveney in East Anglia, who will be evaluating the use of the product in over 2,000 patients in a GP setting that they believe have risk factors and therefore should be screened, or indeed have nodules on X-ray or CT and should be followed up with our blood test. Equally, we are in legal contracting now with another large regional system that will present another 2,000 plus patients in this calendar year, that will be offered the opportunity to have a diagnostic in early CDT lung. And there are a small handful of other commercial negotiations ongoing at the moment. All of this is on a backdrop of COVID that clearly has precluded many of the services that we sell into from operating normally throughout this period. And so we're delighted with progress on this side of the business. Progress would not have been possible, however, without the support of NICE. NICE provided a very positive MedTech innovation briefing in March of last year. And after 6 months of diligence and the company providing substantial amounts of evidence and information to NICE, they have decided to take us forward for the diagnostics assessment program, which is a rarity for a diagnostic company. And so we're delighted to be supporting that process, which we hope to read out with a draft guidance in autumn 2021. Sales volumes throughout our distributor base has been hit as a result of COVID, albeit we have protected ourselves, as many of you will remember, in the relationships we have with our strategic partners in the US, China and Russia, the major markets for this product, by having them retaining performance under the contract by hitting a minimum volume of tests sold into the market. Should they not hit that minimum volume, they are allowed to true up against that minimum volume. And indeed, we are seeing our partners true up as a result of the year where they've had to weather the pandemic in 2020. Having said that, there has been a tremendous uptick in volume requests for us to provide early CDT lung tests into those markets. And so we're incredibly hopeful that we can get back onto forecast with our partners in 2021. Matthew, maybe I can hand over to you for the financials.
So yes, and a very warm welcome to everyone. Just to run through the highlights for the 6 months to 30th of November 2020, a period of tremendous revenue growth, six-fold increase in revenue from admittedly a low base, but for the first half of 2019, we posted £1.83 million of revenue. And also importantly, gross profit, 1.4 million for the period, and indeed a first for Oncimmune, and a validation that the strategy is well and truly heading in the right direction. Administrative expenses, the other half of the P&L, saw a tremendous reduction in our day-to-day expenditure as we focus very much on our run rate of our costs, and we reduced costs wherever we could, and indeed focus those costs only on those costs that were necessary to keep driving the revenue forward. And you saw administrative expenses for the period 2.9 million, substantial reduction from 4.9 million for the same period the previous year. R&D costs was reduced from the same period the previous year at 0.6 million, down from 1 million. Nevertheless, our R&D activities for the year were intense across a number of R&D projects. And so very much the takeaway from R&D is that we are very focused on R&D, as we always have been historically. We have managed, however, to run that R&D programs on a leaner basis, utilizing more in-house costs than out-house costs. All of that has resulted in a significant reduction in the loss after tax. So for the period 2.6 million, down from 5.3 million for the same period last year. And as Adam had indicated at the outset of the presentation, we took the opportunity to invest further in our immunoinsights business. The pipeline of business which we saw building and the discussions which we have with our customers indicated to us that we needed to ensure that we didn't run into any type of capacity constraint or bottlenecks, and indeed we moved proactively to put more equipment and a few more headcounts into that business. And I'm very pleased to say that all of that has gone well and truly according to plan, and we don't currently have any capacity issues at the moment. But obviously, as the business moves forward and the rate of increase of business increases, this is a continual item of discussion for us, observation for us, and we will invest further if the need arises. And finally, just addressing cash and debt. At the end of the period, with £3.2 million of cash, slightly down on the same period, 31st of May 2020. Gross debt for the period was 9.6 million. And just to remind everyone that under the existing debt facility we've got an undrawn facilities of a further €3 million, should we wish to draw upon that if the demands of the business require that. So that's the summary financials for the period. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And just to reiterate Matthew's point, despite the fact R&D spend is down on the same period last year, discretionary spend, of course, we do remain research active. It is only that some of our R&D, of course, has been funded by government grants. And to demonstrate some of that research activity, we were delighted that we were published in the European Respiratory Journal, the ECLS study demonstrating a 36% reduction in that late stage diagnosis of cancer. Our paper in Arthritis Research and Therapy demonstrated some work we had done with our rheumatoid arthritis panel, one of our Navigate panels in profiling IgG antibodies targeting certain autoantigens that are seen in rheumatoid arthritis. And what we were able to demonstrate is not only are we able to diagnose the disease very early, improving early rheumatoid arthritis detection, but also it's very likely that the same panel would be predictive of response to certain forms of novel immune modulating therapies. So one to watch. There's a lot more to be done there, but it certainly has caused quite a stir and excitement in the rheumatoid arthritis community that we hope to be following up on. And then a standalone publication from our collaborators in Leeds who looked at the cost effectiveness of early CDT lung when used in combination with CT in a nodule cohort. This is quite distinct to our Scottish collaborators up at St Andrews who have been driving the ECLS study and will be publishing in the not too distant future their own health economic analysis of early CDT lungs use in screening. But that paper demonstrated a very, very good cost-effective use of early CDT lung was in a nodule clinic environment where they were demonstrating a cost per quality of less than about £2,000. And a quick update on that investment that I've just mentioned from the UK government. The UK government had been looking for ways in which companies such as ours might support their pandemic response. And it became very clear to us that many of the signs and symptoms that you see in patients with COVID-19 have their basis in the immune system and look very similar to autoimmune disease, and as a result, our expertise in that space, having developed a number of these Navigate tools for certain autoimmune diseases, came to the fore. And today we have developed a panel which is smaller than the final panel. It's about 84 antigens. The final panel will be about 800 that we will have completed validation on by the end of this month, and will be ready for prime time at the beginning of next month with some of our nearest and dearest pharmaceutical customers. Validation of the larger panel is a significant effort. We have committed to the British government that we will be analysing over 3,000 COVID patient samples from mild through moderate and through to severe patients with the disease, and so validation will be completed towards the back end of this year for the larger panel. So what does the pipeline look like that we've started to pierce the veil on? There's about 18 and a bit million of revenue currently sat in our funnel, whatever way you cut it. There are in excess of 100 qualified conversations that we are currently marshalling with about 80 unique partners. I was asked last time I spoke in this forum about 4 months ago, how many of these conversations are being had with the same partner, and there is a small handful of partners, 3 or 4, where we're having 4 or 5 conversations with different teams across the breadth of their activity. But in the main, there are 1 or 2 conversations with a significant number of partners, which will add brand names to our stable of in-flight partnerships as and when we're able to convert them. There are a number of tailored proposals which have done the toing and froing, which is very common in a commercial negotiation, and the scientific teams now have a very clear idea as to what it is that we are proposed to deliver them, and many of those are now moving very quickly into the commercial negotiation of terms. There's approximately £2 million of contracts in legal contracting at this point in time, and so they are very, very close to receiving my signature and for the team to start to work on those programs. So a quick summary, and what does the outlook look like? Well, on the ImmunoInsights part of the business, you will have observed a marked increase in commercial activity. We've had to rebuild that BD pipeline, having acquired Protein Diagnostics in March 2019. It's a knowledge-intensive sell. The sales cycles can be 12 months, but nonetheless, we have an excellent pipeline now that's building to smooth out some of the lumpiness in that revenue. And these are all big ticket sales. They're all knowledge-intensive, big ticket sales that can lead to a deepening of a relationship with our pharmaceutical and biotech customers. We've delivered 7, or are delivering 7 in this period and slightly after the period, all of which we believe will lead to further work in time. Equally, on the ImmunoInsights part of the business, we are expending substantial research resource in quickly standing up, or as quick as we possibly can, standing up this research panel for COVID, and already there's a substantial amount of interest. Our Cedars-Sinai partners were, I think, the first to the table, but certainly not the last. There are plenty of others that have been wanting to engage with that panel as and when it's ready. On the early CDT side of the business, we've seen a flurry of first NHS contracts adopting early CDT lung for use in nodules and also in screening without the positive diagnostic assessment program output, which we have been working so hard towards this period and subsequently. So that the adoption is happening. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more regions in the NHS adopt before the end of our financial year, 31 May. And we have dedicated sales resource and a dedicated support team now stood up for our NHS customers. There is, outside of the UK, been a material improvement in forecasts. The US very much leading the way, but others in Europe and particularly our strategic partners in Russia and China are now suggesting that 2021 looks like they might be able to get back to pre-pandemic forecasts for their sale of product into the region. And then finally, just to give you a flavour of the confidence that Biodesix has, it has reconfirmed to the market, is a public company listed on NASDAQ, that it will be increasing its national sales headcount from 32 to 76 on this product, really driving the adoption of early CDT lung in North America. So with that, I'm going to take a pause.
Thank you very much indeed, Adam and Matthew, for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review investor questions submitted already today, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed from your Investor Meet company dashboard, and we'll send you an email when that's ready for you to access. I would also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after this presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. Adam, Matthew, obviously, I know I haven't given you particularly a lot of time, but if you would just click on the Q&A tab on the right-hand side, you'll see a selection of questions. If I could ask you, please, if possible, to read out the question, perhaps who it's from, and give a response where it's appropriate, and I'll pick up at the end.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. And so the first question from Abby R is, how do you prioritize your commercial pipeline and or manage such large interest? And I think that's a great question. It's a challenge that we struggle with on a daily basis, but have one guiding principle, and that is that we are most interested in developing long-lasting relationships, strategic relationships with our pharmaceutical customers. We are not interested in delivering a couple of £100,000 worth of R&D services to our customers. And so our science team evaluate all of our interests and give us a sense of that interest that they believe is going to yield immunoinsights, a signal, if you like, from the samples that we analyze, that ultimately we can go on to productize hand in hand with our customer. And so it's the opportunity to develop a long-lasting and deep relationship with pharma customers that upon which we prioritize our commercial pipeline. Nick J asks, you have a number of great partners. What do we look for to accelerate revenues with them? Well, I think there's a couple of things, Nick. As I've just said, we are most interested in deepening those relationships. And so successful delivery of programs, as and when we can talk about that, and not all customers are happy with us talking about working with them at this stage, or indeed the nature of that work. But certainly the successful delivery of programs is important. Secondly, being able to re-up those contracts, being able to sell into another clinical trial for the same asset belonging to the same pharma company, or another clinical trial with a different asset belonging to the same pharmaceutical company, is really the next level of validation I think people are looking for. But the ultimate validation of the value of this science to our customers, of course, is the deepening of those relationships. It's taking that immune signal and moving it through our own validation product development pipeline, so that ultimately there is a widget, there is an array that we can hand to our pharma customers that they might be able to use for a number of purposes. And at one end of the spectrum, that is to replicate the same science experiment that we've performed in this clinical trial in another clinical trial. And at the other end of the spectrum, it's to develop a companion diagnostic, a diagnostic that can be used hand in hand and regulated hand in hand with a drug, so that when the drug goes to market, clinicians are able to test patients before prescribing the asset to see whether they're going to get the therapeutic benefit that is intended, and they are not going to be seeing the sorts of side effects that have become all too common with immune modulating therapies. Simon C asks, what are the limiting factors on the business, if any? And simply the limiting factor for us is bandwidth. Bandwidth in sales, bandwidth in delivering the quality science through our laboratories, and bandwidth in the bioinformatics or the data science on the back end of our wet science that interprets the results and presents something intelligible back to our pharma customers. And so that's a very fine balancing act. This company is funded substantially to deliver market expectation. However, if we wanted to exceed market expectation, we would need to think about further funding. But I can guarantee you today, this company is funded sufficiently to deliver against market expectation. Nigel B asks, do you have targets for the next financial year for how many of the pipeline opportunities will be converted into contracts? We do. We have a sense in our mind as to how we can deliver the aggressive revenue target that we have in the market today in FY22. But it's important to recognise, Nigel, that these contracts come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. At one end of the spectrum, you could be working on 100 samples with a biotech, and that might be 150 or 200,000 euros worth of revenue, but strategically important because it's going to lead to so much more. And at the other end of the spectrum, you could be working on a contract to analyze 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 samples from a large pharmaceutical company's clinical trial, and in that case, it's a couple of £1 million worth of revenue with significant amount of potential to deepen that relationship moving forward. And so these opportunities come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and so it's rather the number of samples that we need to process and whether we have the infrastructure and capacity in place to be able to deliver that than the number of contracts we need to win that we are more concerned with. Dave M asks, as you sign more contracts during the year, will you need to increase your headcount? And if so, by how much? And I think it's reasonable to think that we will judiciously increase headcount to continue to service that demand. I think you've heard from me already that it is bandwidth that constrains us rather than the total addressable market or competitors. I mean, this is greenfield, and so increasing headcount, the right headcount, is important. In fact, we are in the process at the moment of hiring another bioinformatician, another protein scientist in Dortmund, Germany. But that would be very much in line with supporting revenue generation in the business. And now that we have our cost base firmly under control, we run an incredibly lean ship. We aren't going to be spending without due cause. Russell W asks, are immunoinsights and early CDT run separately? Are there any synergistic benefits between them? And if not, is there a potential for sale? A couple of questions there, Russell. So they are run from separate facilities, and there are separate teams that run both parts of the business, but they are absolutely integrated from top to bottom. They use the same quality management system. They use the same standard operating procedures. They have scientific meetings on a daily basis. And indeed, they work with some of the same customers on the same projects. But in Germany, in Dortmund, Germany, we have our high throughput discovery and tool development and validation team. And then in Nottingham, UK, we have our clinical validation, our diagnostic clinical validation and productization team. And Nottingham is also responsible for all of the supply of early CDT lung into the various different regions where we have distribution agreements. So they are absolutely synergistic and part of the same continuum. But to your second question, is there the potential for sale? Well, they act as two subsidiaries under PLC. It's important to recognize that as a specialist immunology pharma services business, our game is in the discovery, the development, the validation, and ultimately the productization of our proprietary autoantibody-based technology. Our game is not to stand up a substantial sales force and drive those products into markets, but our game is to license or indeed divest those assets at the point at which we have got them to a value inflection. So absolutely, the strategy is to develop products which are best commercialized in the hands of others. The question really is, at what point in the value creation pathway do you hand them over to others? There are a couple of questions about debt, which maybe I'm going to hand over to Matthew. Matthew, maybe you can just give a quick summary of our debt position and a rundown of the various different obligations thereof, as it may answer the majority of the questions I think that are pertaining to this, and then I'll pick up again to run through some more of the market-facing questions.
Yes, thanks. So just to remind everyone that we have a debt facility which is a 4-year facility, and we're already into the 4 years of that facility. And I noticed one of the questions that was asking, had we commenced to pay off some of that debt, and indeed we have. We're 2 quarters into that already. The facility is interest only for the first year, and then repayments for years 2, 3, and 4 thereafter. And so in 3 and a bit years' time, 3.5 years' time, we'll have that debt completely paid off. I think, and again, just to remind everyone, the interest rate on that debt is 9%. So we made that publicly known at the time that we took out the debt. I think that's probably all we need to say on the debt. Probably.
Okay.
I've given the cash and the net debt numbers a little earlier on, so people can see what the exact position is as regards those two.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Richard M. has asked, how impacted are you by political conflicts with Russia and China, and do you see these growing with the change of president in the US? Brexit, IVDR, geopolitical conflicts between Russia, China, the US, others are all front of mind on a daily basis, but the practicalities on the ground are very rarely impacted by these issues. We have very good working relationships with our partners in each of those regions that keep us abreast of their forecast in the market, which does from time to time is from time to time impacted by the situation in their various different geographies. But together we come up with a solution that is mutually beneficial and allows us to continue to deliver against market expectations. So hitherto we've weathered the various different fires that you allude to. Paul B has asked the thorny question of a near-term fundraise, and I think it's important that I reiterate again, and I may sound a little like a broken record, and I have said this possibly for the last 18 months, but this company is fully funded. It is fully funded without the need for a further fundraise to deliver against market expectation. That market expectation, there's a very tight consensus between our brokers. It's plain to see. We stand behind it as a management team, and we believe that the cash on our balance sheet is sufficient in order to deliver that. However, we are in an unconstrained total addressable market. This is greenfield. We don't have competitors. In fact, 2 days ago, a senior vice president from one of our customers emailed me to thank us for the work that we've done. And his final sentence to the email before signing off was, "There is no one else in the world that does what you do." And so, given that sort of endorsement, recognizing that we are only limited by our own bandwidth, of course, in order to maximize this opportunity, create optionality for shareholders, it would be sensible to consider the right funding from the right source at the right time to accelerate our business. We're not doing that at this point in time, but we do give it consideration.
I think that's about it. I think you've probably touched on. I think you amalgamated a few of the funding questions, and apart from that, Adam, I think you've addressed everything. So thank you very much indeed. And of course, if any questions do come in between now and the end, I will make them available to you also. I know investor feedback is important to you, and perhaps I could just ask you for a few words to close up with, and then I will redirect investors to provide you with feedback.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. So companies such as us depend very heavily upon our investors like you, who have been incredibly supportive over the history of this company. I think we are very much now driving real growth through both top line and bottom line, and your continued support is very much appreciated.
That's very kind. Thank you once again, Adam, and to Matthew. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback. If you access this via our website, then the feedback page will appear. But if you access this via the link sent to you by email, you'll just be simply asked to log back in to submit your feedback. On behalf of the management team of Oncimmune, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session. Good afternoon to you all.